Bells above diner doors shouldn't choke, but this one did. Naomi scrubbed stained formica, ignoring sharp aches radiating from her bruised ribs. 2 a.m. A rusted Dodge idling across a rain-slicked parking lot meant her husband waited outside. In booth 4, a solitary man watched her. He didn't wear a tailored suit, just a heavy dark coat, smelling of wet pavement and cold smoke. Naomi dropped her glass coffee pot and begged him to hide her. The diner smelled of burned filter coffee, old fryer grease, and the sharp chemical tang of industrial bleach. It was a smell that seeped into Naomi's pores, surviving 2 showers and a heavy scrubbing with cheap bar soap. Tonight it made her nauseous, or maybe that was the concussive throb pulsing behind her left eye. The clock above the pie case hummed. 2:14 a.m. 16 minutes until the end of her shift. 16 minutes until she had to take off her stained yellow apron, walk out the heavy glass door, and get into the passenger seat of Greg's truck. Her phone buzzed against her hip. A short, angry vibration. She didn't need to look at the screen to know what it said. Get out here. Or maybe just, you're making me wait. The exact words didn't matter. The consequence did. The dull ache blooming across her lower back, a parting gift from yesterday morning, tightened in anticipation. Naomi grabbed a damp rag and began scrubbing a stain on the counter that had been there since 1998. She scrubbed until her knuckles went white, until the friction burned the pad of her thumb. She was avoiding looking out the window. The rain was coming down in sheets, distorting the neon pink "open" sign into a bleeding, blurry smear across the wet asphalt. Through that pink smear, the heavy headlights of Greg's truck cut through the darkness. The engine was running. He was burning gas just to make a point. "Hey, Naomi, you deaf?" Jimmy the line cook leaned through the pass. His face was slick with sweat, a cigarette tucked behind one ear. "Table 4 needs a refill. Guy's been staring at an empty mug for 10 minutes. Naomi blinked the diner, snapping back into focus. "Right. Sorry." She picked up the glass carafe with a shaking hand. The coffee inside was black, oily, and scalding. She walked past the empty booths, the scuffed linoleum squeaking beneath her rubber-soled shoes. Booth 4 was in the far corner, swallowed by the shadows, where the overhead fluorescent tube had flickered and died 2 weeks ago. The man sitting there was a regular, though Naomi didn't know his name. He came in twice a week, always between midnight and 3, always alone. He ordered black coffee and heavily salted eggs, and he never touched the food. He wasn't a loud man. He didn't bark orders or leer at the waitresses. He just sat. But he took up space in a way that made the air around him feel thin. He wore a dark wool overcoat unbuttoned over a charcoal sweater. His hands rested flat on the chipped laminate table. They were large, brutal hands. The knuckles on his right hand were currently split, the edges of the cuts scabbed over in dark, angry lines. Naomi approached the table. Her breath hitched. The truck outside revved its engine, a low, guttural roar that rattled the diner's single-pane windows. Greg was losing his patience. Naomi's hand jerked. The glass carafe tipped too far. A stream of scalding coffee splashed over the rim of the mug, spilling onto the table and pooling rapidly toward the man's sleeve. "Oh, God," Naomi gasped, snapping the pot back. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry." She frantically grabbed the thin, rough paper napkins from the dispenser and began dabbing at the mess. Her hands were trembling so violently she knocked the sugar shaker over. White crystals spilled into the brown puddle. The man didn't flinch. He didn't pull his arm back. He just watched her. Up close, he smelled of rain leather and something metallic, like copper, like blood. His eyes were dark, a flat, unreadable brown, and they tracked the erratic, panicked movements of her hands. He didn't look at the spill. He looked at the stark purple bruise peeking out from the collar of her uniform. He looked at the way she flinched when the truck engine revved again, outside. "Leave it," he said. His voice was low, gravelly, barely carrying over the hiss of the rain. Naomi stopped. The soggy napkins disintegrated in her grip. The urge to run, to flee out the back door and disappear into the alley was a physical pressure in her chest. But she had $12 to her name. She had nowhere to run. The truck roared again. A horn honked. One short, sharp blast. "He's coming inside," she thought. "If I don't go out, he's coming in." She dropped the rag. She didn't think. The survival instinct, battered and buried under years of compliance, suddenly snapped violently to the surface. It wasn't a heroic decision. It was cornered animal desperation. "Hide me," she whispered. The man didn't blink. He sat perfectly still, the steam from the spilled coffee curling between them. "Please," Naomi said. Her voice broke a pathetic, ragged sound. She leaned closer, bracing her hands on the table. The Formica was cold. "He's in the truck. He's going to kill me tonight. I know he is. Please, just let me get in your car." Jimmy shouted from the kitchen. "Naomi, order up." The man in booth 4 slowly turned his head toward the window. He looked at the truck. He looked at the exhaust fumes curling into the rain. Then he looked back at Naomi. There was no pity in his face. No sudden, warm rush of knight-in-shining armor resolve. It was an assessment. Cold, mathematical. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. He extracted a $100 bill, tossed it onto the spilled coffee, and stood up. He was taller than she realized, broad-shouldered, blocking out the neon light from the window. "Walk out the back door," he said quietly. "Count to 60, then come around to the alley. Black sedan." He didn't wait for her answer. He turned and walked toward the front of the diner. The back alley smelled of rotting cabbage and wet brick. Naomi stood flat against the damp wall, shivering violently. The rain soaked through her thin cotton uniform, instantly plastering the cheap yellow fabric to her skin. Her teeth chattered so hard her jaw ached. 58, 59, 60. She peeked around the corner of the brick building. The front parking lot was a pool of yellow streetlights and shadows. Greg's truck was still there. The driver's side door opened. A heavy boot hit the pavement. Naomi yanked herself back into the alley, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She clamped a hand over her mouth to muffle the sound of her own ragged breathing. He was coming inside the diner. He would see Jimmy. Jimmy would say she went out back. Headlights flashed at the far end of the alley. A sleek black car, long, low, and quiet, crept through the narrow space between the dumpsters. It didn't have its high beams on, just the running lights. It pulled up beside her and stopped. The passenger door clicked unlocked. Naomi didn't hesitate. She grabbed the handle, pulled the heavy door open, and threw herself inside. The door shut with a solid, airtight thud, cutting off the sound of the rain instantly. The interior was pitch black, save for the faint glow of the dashboard. It smelled of expensive leather, dry air, and that same faint copper scent. The temperature was perfectly regulated. It was a jarring shift from the chaotic, freezing wetness of the alley. The man was behind the wheel. He shifted the car into gear. "Seatbelt," he murmured. Naomi fumbled blindly in the dark, her wet fingers slipping on the metal buckle. She finally clicked it into place. The car glided forward. They didn't exit into the main parking lot. The man drove further down the alley, navigating the tight, trash-strewn space with smooth precision. They pulled out onto a side street 3 blocks away from the diner's neon sign. Naomi looked in the side mirror. She couldn't see the truck. She couldn't see anything but darkness and rain. She let out a breath. It sounded like a sob. She covered her face with her wet hands, the adrenaline suddenly draining from her muscles, leaving her hollow and trembling. The silence in the car was suffocating. She expected him to ask questions. What did he do to you? Why is he after you? What's your name? He asked nothing. He drove with one hand resting casually on the bottom of the steering wheel. The dashboard lights illuminated his profile, a sharp jaw, a broken nose that had healed, slightly crooked dark stubble. I ruined your seats, Naomi whispered, staring down at her soaked uniform, dripping onto the perforated leather. They dry, he said. I don't know your name. Liam. I'm Naomi. He didn't respond to that. He merged onto the highway. The wipers slapped rhythmically against the windshield. Where are we going? She asked, a new, colder panic beginning to set in. The reality of what she had just done was catching up to her. She had gotten into a stranger's car, a man who bled from his knuckles and tossed $100 bills into spilled coffee. Away from the diner, Liam replied flatly. I don't have any money. I left my purse in my locker. I only have my tips. She dug a hand into her apron pocket, pulling out a crumpled wad of damp $1 bills and quarters. The coins clinked pathetically in the quiet car. I have $12.40. I can pay you for gas. Just drop me at the Greyhound station. Liam finally glanced at her. The look was brief, cutting through the dim light of the cabin. Put your money away, Naomi. Then why are you helping me? She pressed her voice, rising thick with suspicion. Nobody does anything for free. He kept his eyes on the road. The windshield wipers swept a rhythmic, hypnotic beat. Your husband drives a '98 Ram, midnight blue, dent on the left quarter panel, custom dual exhaust. Naomi froze. The damp dollar bills slipped from her fingers, fluttering down to the floor mats. How do you know that? His name is Greg Miller. Liam continued, his voice devoid of any inflection. It was just data to him. He works construction, lays drywall, spends most of his paycheck at a track off Route 9. He owes $30,000 to a bookie named Sal. Naomi's stomach plummeted. A cold, metallic taste flooded her mouth. She pressed herself against the passenger door, her hand hovering over the door handle. She was suddenly, terrifyingly aware of the locked doors, the thick glass, the heavy, inescapable weight of the man sitting 2 feet away. She had traded one monster for another, and this one drove a quiet car. Who are you? She breathed. I'm the man Sal works for, Liam said. He hit the turn signal. The car banked off the highway, taking an exit that led into the industrial district, a labyrinth of corrugated metal warehouses and shipping containers. Let me out, Naomi said, her voice shaking. She yanked on the door handle. It was locked. Let me out right now. Liam didn't speed up. He didn't lock her in with a dramatic click. He just reached over and pressed a button on his console. The locks disengaged. You can get out, Liam said calmly, pulling the car over to the shoulder. He put it in park. The rain was coming down harder now, hammering against the roof. Outside, it was pitch black. Nothing but miles of empty chain-link fences and flooded drainage ditches. It's a 5-mile walk back to civilization, Liam said, looking straight ahead. Greg is currently tearing the diner apart looking for you. When he realizes you're gone, he'll go to your apartment. Then he'll check your sister's house in the Heights. If you get out of this car, he will find you by sunrise. I am your only option, Naomi. Naomi stared at the unlocked door handle. She looked out the window at the terrifying, rain-soaked void. She looked at Liam. She slowly pulled her hand away from the door. Drive, she whispered. Liam shifted the car back into gear. They didn't go to a sprawling mansion on a hill. There were no iron gates or armed guards visible in the rain. Liam pulled the sedan into an unmarked loading bay behind a meatpacking plant. The air here smelled heavily of ozone-wet cardboard and the faint, lingering scent of raw copper. He killed the engine. The silence that rushed in was deafening. "Get out," he said, stepping into the rain. Naomi followed, her legs stiff and uncooperative. She pulled her thin arms around herself, shivering as the icy wind whipped through the loading bay. Liam unlocked a heavy steel door and pushed it open. He didn't hold it for her. He walked inside, flipping a switch, the space illuminated with the harsh, buzzing glare of fluorescent lights. It wasn't a home. It was a sterile, windowless office attached to the warehouse. A metal desk sat in the center, buried under stacks of manifests and ledgers. 2 filing cabinets stood against the far wall. An old leather sofa, cracked and peeling, sat in the corner next to a mini-fridge. It felt temporary. It felt like a place where people made decisions they didn't want to be remembered. "Sit," Liam said, gesturing toward the sofa. Naomi sat. The leather was cold against her wet uniform. She tucked her knees to her chest, trying to stop the violent trembling in her shoulders. Liam walked to a metal locker in the corner, pulled out a thick grey wool blanket and tossed it to her. It smelled like mothballs and dust, but it was dry. She wrapped it around her shoulders, immediately burying her face in the rough fabric. He didn't offer her a drink. He didn't offer comfort. He walked behind the metal desk, pulled out a chair and sat down. He opened a drawer, extracted a burner phone, and set it on the desk. Then he looked at her. Under the harsh lights, Naomi saw the true extent of him. He wasn't just a tough guy in a diner. He looked exhausted. Deep purple bags hung beneath his eyes, and his jaw was locked tight with tension. The blood on his knuckles was fresh. He had hit something, or someone, very recently. "Why did you bring me here?" Naomi asked. Her voice sounded thin, reedy in the large room. "Because you asked me to," Liam said simply. "You said Greg owes you $30,000. Am I hostage? Are you going to call him and tell him you have me?" Liam let out a short, humorless exhale. It wasn't quite a laugh. "Greg Miller doesn't care enough about you to pay $30 for your safe return, let alone $30,000. You aren't leverage, Naomi. You're a liability." The blunt cruelty of the truth stung, even if she already knew it. She swallowed hard, tasting the bitterness in her throat. "Then why?" "Because Greg has been hiding from my men for 3 weeks. He stopped answering his phone. He moved his truck to a different lot every night. The only thing he showed up for, predictably, was you. Because he needs someone to hit." Liam leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. "I go to that diner to watch you, because I knew eventually he would get impatient and show up to drag you out." Naomi's stomach twisted. The man hadn't been a quiet, brooding regular. He had been a hunter sitting in a deer blind, and she was the bait. "You used me," she breathed. "I observed you," he corrected smoothly. "And tonight he showed up. My men are currently at the diner. They are picking Greg up as we speak." Naomi stiffened. "They're going to kill him." Liam didn't answer. He picked up a pen from the desk and rolled it between his fingers. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. "Are they?" Naomi pressed her voice, trembling. A strange, chaotic mix of terror and profound, horrifying relief washed over her. "Greg Miller's debt is significant," Liam said, his tone entirely detached. "But his real problem is that he borrowed money from Sal to buy synthetic narcotics, which he then attempted to sell on my territory. It's bad business. It requires a correction." Naomi squeezed her eyes shut. She had known Greg was bad. She knew about the gambling, the drinking, the violent temper that snapped like a dry twig. But this, the mob. Drugs. It was a world she only saw on the cracked screen of her living room television. "What happens to me?" she asked. She opened her eyes. She expected to see him looking at her with hunger, or malice, or calculating cruelty. The things men usually looked at her with. Instead, Liam opened a drawer and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He tossed it across the desk. It slid over the polished metal and stopped near the edge. "Open it," he commanded. Naomi slowly stood up, keeping the heavy blanket clutched tightly around her. She walked to the desk. Her fingers grazed the rough paper of the envelope. She unhooked the metal clasp and dumped the contents onto the desk. Stacks of bills tumbled out. Hundreds, 50s, at least $10,000. Along with the money was a small blue booklet, a passport. Naomi picked up the passport. She opened it. The photo was of her, a grainy copy of her driver's license picture. The name printed next to it was Sarah Jenkins. "What is this?" she whispered. "It's a bus ticket out of this state, a clean name, and enough cash to rent an apartment in a town where nobody cares who you are," Liam said. He didn't look at the money. He looked at her hands. He looked at the way her thumb traced the fake name. "Why?" Naomi asked again, looking up at him. The confusion was warring with the desperate, clawing need to take the money and run. "I'm the bait. You caught him. You don't owe me anything. You said it yourself. Nobody does anything for free." Liam stood up. He walked around the desk, stopping a few feet away from her. The proximity made her heart race, but she didn't step back. She couldn't. "Greg Miller is going away," Liam said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming softer, more dangerous. When a man like that disappears, the police look at the wife. They look at the bruised ribs, the broken wrist from last year, the noise complaints from the neighbors. They build a narrative. They will say you snapped. They will drag you into an interrogation room, and eventually, because you are terrified, you will tell them about the man in the dark coat at the diner. Naomi shook her head. "I wouldn't. I swear I wouldn't." "You would," Liam said, stating a simple fact. "Because you are a survivor. I saw you tonight. You spilled hot coffee inches from a man you didn't know because you realized your window to live was closing. You will say whatever you have to say to survive. I respect that. But I cannot afford it." He reached out. Naomi flinched instinctively, her shoulders drawing up to her ears. Liam paused. His hand hovered in the air between them for a fraction of a second. Then slowly, deliberately, he reached past her and tapped the manila envelope. "Take the money, Naomi. Go to the bus station. Disappear." Naomi stared at the envelope. It was freedom. It was a terrifying, lonely, uncertain freedom, bought with the blood of a man she hated and provided by a man she feared. She reached out and picked up the envelope. It felt impossibly heavy. "Thank you," she whispered. Liam turned his back to her, walking toward the metal lockers. "Don't thank me. Just be gone before the sun comes up." Naomi clutched the envelope to her chest. She turned toward the heavy steel door. She had her hand on the handle when a sound stopped her. It was a sharp electronic chirp. Liam's burner phone was ringing on the desk. Liam stopped walking. He stared at the phone. He didn't rush to answer it. He let it ring 3 times before he picked it up and pressed it to his ear. "Yeah." He listened. The silence in the room stretched until it felt brittle enough to snap. Naomi stood by the door, her breath caught in her throat. She watched the muscles in Liam's back go rigid. She watched his grip on the phone tighten until his knuckles went white under the scabs. "Repeat that," Liam said. His voice was a dead, flat whisper. He listened for another 10 seconds. Then he slowly lowered the phone. He didn't hang up. He just let his arm drop to his side. He turned around to face Naomi. The exhausted, pragmatic look was gone from his eyes. It was replaced by something cold, sharp, and infinitely violent. "Put the envelope down," Liam said. Naomi's grip tightened on the money. "You said I could go." "Things have changed," Liam said, taking a slow step toward her. The air in the room suddenly felt dangerously thin again. "My men went to the diner to pick up your husband." "And—" Naomi breathed, her heart hammering wildly. "And," Liam said, his eyes locking onto hers, "Greg wasn't there." He took another step. "But 5 dead men were. He shot my crew, Naomi, and left a message on the counter." Liam's gaze dropped to the bruise on her neck. "He knows you're with me, and he knows who I am." The manila envelope hit the concrete floor with a dull, heavy slap. The clasp broke open. Stacks of $100 bills spilled out, fanning across the dust like a discarded hand of cards. Naomi didn't look at the money. She couldn't tear her eyes away from Liam. "Greg lays drywall." She whispered the word, sounding absurd even to her own ears. "He drinks cheap beer until he passes out on the rug. He misses truck payments. He doesn't kill 5 men." Liam didn't argue. He moved. The detached, exhausted boss sitting behind the desk was gone. In his place was something kinetic and terrifyingly precise. He pulled open the bottom drawer of the desk, bypassing the paperwork, and withdrew a heavy matte black handgun. He racked the slide with a sharp metallic clack that made Naomi flinch violently. "He did," Liam said, his voice stripped of all emotion. And he left a sugar shaker tipped over in a puddle of black coffee on the counter. He watched us. Or he caught Jimmy in the kitchen before he finished him off. A violent shudder ripped through Naomi. Jimmy? The line cook with the sweat-slicked face and the cigarette behind his ear. Jimmy, who had just been doing his job, calling out table numbers. Bile rose hot and acidic in the back of her throat. She clamped a hand over her mouth, swallowing hard against the sudden urge to vomit. "We need to move," Liam said, shoving the gun into the waistband at the small of his back. He grabbed a heavy canvas duffel bag from the locker and began violently sweeping the contents of the desk into it, ledgers, hard drives, the broken burner phone. "Move where—" Naomi's voice was a high, thin scrape. Panic, raw and jagged, clawed at her chest. "You said I could go. You gave me the passport. The bus station is a choke point," Liam snapped, zipping the bag shut. He stepped around the desk, his boots crunching over the scattered $100 bills. He grabbed her upper arm. His grip wasn't bruising, but it was an iron clamp. "If he knows who I am, he knows how my people operate. He'll have the transit hubs watched. You walk into Greyhound, you're dead before you buy a ticket." He dragged her toward the heavy steel door. "Why does he care?" Naomi cried out, stumbling over her own rubber-soled shoes as she struggled to keep up. "He doesn't love me. I'm just his punching bag. Why would he risk the mob for me?" Liam shoved the door open, pushing her out into the freezing rain of the loading bay. "Because nobody takes what belongs to him. Not even me." The drive away from the meatpacking plant was nothing like the silent, controlled glide from the diner. Liam drove with an aggressive, predatory focus. He kept the sedan's headlights off as they tore through the industrial park, navigating by the ambient yellow glow of street lamps, reflecting off the wet pavement. He took violent, sudden turns, tires protesting with short, sharp squeals against the asphalt. He was checking his mirrors every 3 seconds. His jaw clenched so tight the muscle fluttered beneath his stubble. Naomi pressed herself against the passenger door, her knees drawn up to her chest, beneath the mothball-scented blanket. The cold from her wet uniform was sinking deep into her bones, making her joints ache. But the physical discomfort was distant, muffled by the overwhelming roar of adrenaline in her ears. She had thought Greg was a localized weather event, a tornado that only touched down in their cramped second-floor apartment. She knew how to survive him. You stayed quiet, you covered your head, and you waited for the storm to pass. But this wasn't a storm. This was a war. And she had inadvertently dragged the tornado straight into a minefield. "I don't understand," she muttered into the dark cabin. She wasn't talking to Liam. She was trying to force the fractured pieces of her reality to fit together. 5 men. Your men. They carry guns, right? They know how to fight. They were professionals, Liam said, banking hard onto an empty frontage road. Then how? Liam finally glanced at her. The dashboard lights cast harsh shadows across his face, turning his eyes into hollow, dark pits. "That is exactly the question I need you to answer, Naomi. Because the man you described to me, the desperate, degenerate gambler, doesn't take down a heavily armed crew without taking a scratch. They abandoned the sleek black sedan in a long-term parking lot at the regional airport, swapping it for a rusted, unremarkable Ford Taurus that Liam had unlocked with a key taped under the rear bumper. By the time they reached the safe house, the rain had slowed to a miserable, freezing drizzle. The sky to the east was beginning to bleed a bruised charcoal grey. The building was a defunct dry-cleaning business, nestled between a pawn shop and a boarded-up liquor store in a neighborhood that smelled of wet garbage and despair. Liam unlocked a heavy reinforced steel door in the alley, leading them up a narrow flight of stairs that reeked of old chemical solvents and mildew. He pushed open a door at the top of the landing. The apartment was stark. The windows were boarded over from the inside, with thick plywood plunging the room into a suffocating gloom until Liam flicked a switch. A single bare bulb illuminated a space stripped of anything personal. There was a metal table, 4 folding chairs, a sagging futon, and a kitchenette covered in a thin layer of dust. A man was sitting at the table. He had a pump-action shotgun resting across his thighs. He jumped to his feet as the door opened his finger, instinctively drifting toward the trigger guard, before he recognized Liam. "Boss!" The man exhaled the tension bleeding out of his shoulders. He was young, maybe 25, wearing a cheap track jacket. He looked terrified. "Status Hayes," Liam demanded, locking the heavy deadbolts behind them. "Radio silence from the diner crew." Hayes said, his voice tight. "Cops have the block cordoned off. It's a bloodbath, Liam. Sirens everywhere. Sal is blowing up the encrypted line. He wants to know what the hell went wrong with a simple collection." "Let Sal wait," Liam said, tossing the duffel bag onto the futon. He turned his attention to Naomi. She was standing by the door, dripping onto the scuffed hardwood floor, clutching the blanket around her like a shield. She was vibrating with cold and shock. "Bathroom is through there," Liam told her, pointing to a narrow door off the kitchen. "Take off the uniform. Leave it in the sink. There's a duffel bag in the cabinet with clean clothes. Put them on." Naomi didn't argue. She felt entirely hollowed out, operating on primitive autopilot. She walked into the bathroom and locked the flimsy door. It was freezing inside. The tiles were cracked. She dropped the blanket, shivering violently, and reached behind her back to untie the stained yellow apron. Her fingers were clumsy, numb from the cold. When she finally peeled the wet, clinging cotton uniform off her skin, she caught sight of herself in the rusted medicine cabinet mirror. She looked like a corpse. Her skin was a translucent mottled grey under the harsh bathroom light. Dark, bruised circles hollowed out her eyes, but it was the canvas of her torso that made her look away. A massive, ugly bloom of purple, yellow, and black spanned the left side of her ribcage. A fading set of finger marks stained her upper arm. An older, greenish bruise sat low on her hip. It was a map of Greg's anger. "He doesn't kill 5 men." Her brain repeated, stuck on an endless, looping track. She found the duffel bag under the sink. It held men's clothes, thick cotton t-shirts, sweatpants, heavy wool socks. She pulled on a black t-shirt that hung down to her mid-thigh, and a pair of sweatpants she had to roll at the waist 3 times to keep from falling down. They smelled faintly of laundry detergent and gunpowder. When she emerged from the bathroom, the dynamic in the main room had shifted. Hayes was gone. Liam was standing by the metal table, stripping a handgun apart with smooth, practiced motions. He wiped the internal mechanisms with a rag, his face a mask of intense concentration. He looked up as she walked in. He took in the oversized clothes, the damp hair plastered to her skull, the defensive way she held her arms crossed over her stomach. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a folding chair across from him. Naomi sat. The metal was cold through the thick sweatpants. "We have a problem, Naomi," Liam said, setting the slide of the gun down with a heavy clatter. "My men went into that diner expecting a loud, sloppy drunk. They expected a man who would throw a punch, maybe pull a cheap Saturday night special, and then fold. Instead, they walked into a tactical ambush." Naomi stared at the disassembled gun parts. "I don't know what you want me to say. I told you what he is." "You told me what he allowed you to see," Liam corrected, leaning forward. He planted his large, bruised hands flat on the table. "I need you to think. Not about the beatings. Not about the gambling. Look past the noise. What did he do when he thought you weren't looking?" "He drank," Naomi said, her voice defensive, cracking at the edges. "He watched TV. He slept." "Where does he work?" "Construction sites. He lays drywall for a contractor named Miller, his uncle." "When was the last time he came home with drywall dust on his boots?" Liam asked. The question was sharp, a scalpel cutting through the fog of her trauma. Naomi blinked. She frowned, her mind flashing back over the past few weeks. The heavy work boots kicked off by the front door, the piles of dirty laundry she washed. I don't know," she murmured. "Think," Liam pressed his voice, dropping rough and urgent. "You wash his clothes, you clean the apartment. What does he smell like when he comes home? Drywall is chalky. It smells like plaster. Does he smell like plaster?" Naomi closed her eyes. She put herself back in the cramped, suffocating hallway of their apartment. She saw the boots. She smelled the heavy masculine scent of him. Sweat. Stale beer. And something else. Her eyes snapped open. "No. Not plaster. Acetone. And sulfur. Like struck matches, but thicker. It burned my nose when I picked his jackets up off the floor." Liam's jaw tightened. "Chemicals. He said he was doing demo work at an old industrial site," Naomi offered quickly, though the excuse sounded flimsy even to her now. "He wasn't doing demo work," Liam said flatly. "He's cooking, or he's refining." The silence in the room stretched heavy and oppressive. The implications hung in the stale air between them. "Cooking what?" Naomi asked, though she already knew the answer. Liam had told her in the meatpacking plant. Synthetic narcotics. Sal thought Greg was just a low-level distributor who got greedy. Liam explained, picking up a cloth and wiping down the barrel of the gun. He owed money, so he tried to peddle his own homemade garbage on our corners to make a quick buck. That's a standard annoyance. You break their legs, take their product, and move on. Liam paused, locking his dark eyes onto hers. But a man who can synthesize a stable chemical product and single-handedly wipe out an armed hit squad isn't a low-level distributor. He's trained, which means Greg Miller isn't a drywaller who got in over his head. He's an operator. And he's embedded in my city. Naomi felt the blood drain from her face. The monster in her closet had just stepped into the light, and he was 10 times larger than she had ever imagined. "I lived with him for 4 years," she whispered, her voice trembling. I slept next to him. How could I not know? Because men like that are experts at camouflage, Liam said softly. It was the gentlest his voice had sounded since she met him. It wasn't pity, but a grim, shared acknowledgement of the darkness in human nature. The drinking, the gambling, the domestic violence. It's the perfect cover. Nobody looks twice at a white trash wife-beater. The cops ignore him. The neighbors avoid him. He made himself invisible by being utterly disgustingly ordinary. A sickening wave of betrayal crashed over Naomi. It was entirely different from the physical abuse. This was a violation of reality. Greg had used her. He had used her pain, her bruises, her quiet, terrified submission as a shield to hide his real life. Every time the police had been called for a noise complaint, they had looked at her bleeding lip, written him off as a local drunk, and walked away. She wasn't just a victim. She was an unwitting accomplice to her own camouflage. "The duffel bag," Naomi blurted out. The memory surfaced with sudden, violent clarity. Liam stopped wiping the gun. "What duffel bag?" "In the back of his closet." Naomi said the words, spilling out of her fast, her pulse thumping in her throat, thick and fast. "It's heavy canvas, olive green. It has a padlock on the zipper. He told me it was old hunting gear from his dad, and that if I ever touched it, he would break my arm." "When did he bring it into the apartment?" "A year ago, around the time he stopped going to the Miller construction sites." Liam rapidly reassembled the handgun, slapping the magazine into place with a sharp crack. "Is he possessive of it? Does he take it with him?" "No." Naomi shook her head. "It stays shoved under a pile of winter coats. But last week, I came home from a double shift early. He was sitting on the floor with it open. He slammed it shut the second he saw me. He hit me so hard, I lost hearing in my left ear for 2 days." She touched her jaw absent-mindedly, the phantom pain ghosting over the bone. "I saw metal inside, black metal, not hunting rifles, short things, and thick bundled bricks wrapped in silver duct tape." Liam let out a slow, controlled breath. "Cash and tactical weapons. He's a drop man for a cartel, or a rival family." Liam stood up, pacing the short length of the room. The space was suddenly too small for the energy rolling off him. He was no longer just dealing with a messy collection. He was looking down the barrel of a turf war. He left the diner to come look for me. Naomi said the realization hitting her not with a bang, but with the slow, suffocating weight of wet sand burying her alive. "He killed your men and then he left. He didn't run. He's looking for me." "He knows you're with me," Liam confirmed, stopping to look at her. "He saw the car, or he recognized the description. He left the sugar shaker as a calling card to tell me he's coming for his property. Why?" Naomi's voice broke. A tear, hot and furious, spilled over her lower lash line. She wiped it away savagely with the back of her oversized sleeve. "If he has all this money, all these secrets, why does he care if I leave? I'm nothing. I'm just the waitress." Liam walked slowly back to the table. He stood over her. He didn't touch her, but his proximity was a heavy grounding force in the chaotic swirl of her panic. "Because you know about the smell of acetone," Liam said quietly. "You know about the duffel bag. You know his routines. You know exactly what time he leaves, what time he comes back, and how he operates in his blind spots." He leaned down his face, inches from hers. She could smell the rain and the metallic tang of gunpowder on his skin. "You aren't his punching bag anymore." "Naomi!" Liam said, his dark eyes locking onto hers, intense and burning with a terrifying strategic fire. "You are his loose end, and to me you are the only map I have to tear him apart." Naomi stared back at him. The sheer terror in her chest began to crystallize, hardening into something cold and sharp. For 4 years she had survived by making herself small, by taking the hits, by begging for scraps of mercy. But sitting in this freezing, chemical-smelling safe house, looking into the eyes of a mob boss who needed her, a foreign, dangerous thought sparked to life in the dark corners of her mind. She wasn't helpless anymore. She was a weapon. Naomi's hand shook so badly, the pen tore through the thin, cheap paper of the legal pod. She stared at the jagged blue line. It was supposed to be the wall separating their cramped kitchen from the living room. Instead, it looked like a violent heartbeat. She dropped the pen. It hit the metal table with a hollow clatter. "I can't," she breathed, wiping her damp palms on the thighs of the oversized sweatpants. "My hands won't stop." Liam didn't offer a platitude. He didn't tell her it was going to be okay. He pulled the legal pad across the table, picked up the pen and looked at her. "Tell me," he said. "I'll draw." Naomi swallowed the thick knot in her throat. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to walk through the front door of apartment 2B. "The door sticks." She said, her voice a fragile scrape in the quiet safe house. "You have to push your shoulder against the wood right below the deadbolt to get it to turn. When you walk in, the hallway is narrow. 3 paces. The kitchen is an open archway to the left. The living room is straight ahead." Liam sketched rapidly, his strokes clean and brutal. "Where is the bedroom?" "Off the living room. Right side. The closet is on the far wall opposite the window." She opened her eyes, watching the floor plan materialize under his pen. It was strange seeing her prison reduced to ink lines and geometric shapes. It looked so small. For 4 years it had felt like the entire world. "The duffel bag," Liam prompted, tapping the square representing the closet. "Is it buried?" "Yes, under heavy winter coats and old boots, things he never wears." Naomi paused, her mind catching on a detail she had scrubbed from her memory, purely for survival. "There's a floorboard." Liam stopped drawing. He looked up the harsh overhead light, casting deep shadows into the hollows of his cheeks. "A loose board." In the living room, Naomi said, the memory suddenly sharp, smelling of stale beer and old dust. "Under the radiator. About 3 months ago I was vacuuming. The brush attachment caught on the edge of the wood and pulled it up. There was a cavity underneath. Shallow, maybe 4 inches deep. What was in it? Nothing, she said. Just dust. But when Greg saw what I had done, he lost his mind." She didn't elaborate on the beating. She didn't need to. Her left shoulder involuntarily hitched muscle memory, bracing for a phantom blow. He nailed it back down himself. 2 thick, heavy nails. I never touched that side of the room again. Liam stared at the diagram. He tapped the pen rhythmically against the table. Click, click, click. The sound was mathematical calculating. "A stash hole," he murmured. "If he's operating as a drop man, he needs a place to hold product before moving it to the duffel bag, or a place to keep his ledger." Hayes, who had been standing silently by the boarded-up window, shifted his weight. "Liam, if this guy wiped out 5 of our guys, we shouldn't be hunting him. We should be calling Sal. We need numbers. We need a cleanup crew." Liam didn't look at Hayes. He kept his eyes on the paper. "Sal doesn't know what Greg Miller is. If we bring Sal's men into this, they'll walk in blind, just like the diner crew. It'll be a slaughter. And if Sal realizes a cartel operator, set up shop in his territory, right under his nose, he won't just kill Greg. He'll burn the entire block down to save face." Liam finally looked up, his dark eyes locking onto Naomi's. "And he will definitely kill the wife to make sure there are no loose ends." A cold, heavy dread settled in the pit of Naomi's stomach. There was no bus ticket out of this. There was no new name, no quiet town where she could disappear. Greg had tied her to him, and by extension, tied her to the mob. The only way out was through the center of the fire. "He's going back to the apartment," Liam stated, sliding the pen into his pocket. "He knows I have you. He knows I'll eventually figure out who he really is. He needs his money, his weapons, and whatever is under that floorboard before he disappears." "When?" Naomi asked, her pulse drumming against her ribs. "Now," Liam said, standing up. "Before the sun comes up. Before the cops finish bagging the bodies at the diner and start looking for next of kin." He reached into the duffel bag on the futon and pulled out a heavy Kevlar vest. He tossed it to Hayes. Then he pulled out a second handgun, checking the magazine with a sharp, fluid motion. He didn't offer one to Naomi. She didn't know how to hold a gun anyway. She would just be a liability with a trigger. "What do you need me to do?" Naomi asked. The words tasted like ash. She was terrified, a low, vibrating hum of pure fear sitting behind her breastbone. But beneath the fear, beneath the years of conditioned submission, a dark, jagged sliver of anger was finally taking root. Liam stopped. He looked at her truly, looked at her evaluating the way she held her jaw, the defensive posture of her shoulders. "I need your keys," Liam said. "And I need you to stay exactly behind me." The sky was the color of a bruised plum, a dark, sickly purple bleeding into grey when Liam pulled the rusted Ford Taurus into the alley behind Naomi's apartment building. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a thick, freezing fog that clung to the brickwork and the overflowing dumpsters. The air smelled of wet asphalt and rotting cardboard. It was the smell of Naomi's daily dread. Every morning she walked out into this alley to go to the diner. Every night she walked back, wondering what mood was waiting for her up the stairs. Liam killed the engine. The silence was immediate and oppressive. He turned to Naomi. "We go up the fire escape. If he's already inside, he'll be listening for the front door to stick." Naomi nodded. Her teeth were chattering, clicking together so hard her jaw ached. She wasn't just cold. She was entering a state of hyper-arousal, her nervous system flooding with adrenaline. They climbed out of the car. Hayes took point, moving with a surprising fluid silence for a man wearing heavy boots. He scaled the rusted iron ladder of the fire escape, his shotgun held tight to his chest. Liam motioned for Naomi to follow. The metal rungs were freezing and slick with condensation. Naomi's hands, buried in the oversized sleeves of the borrowed shirt, slipped twice, sending spikes of pure panic through her chest. Liam was right behind her, a solid, heavy presence. Once, when her boot slipped on a wet grate, his hand snapped out, gripping her hip bone through the thick sweatpants, anchoring her, until she found her footing. They reached the second-floor landing. Naomi pointed to a window. The glass was grimy, the blinds pulled tight, but a thin, pale sliver of yellow light bled through a crack at the bottom. Greg was home. Liam pressed his back against the brick wall beside the window. He drew his handgun. He looked at Hayes, who was stationed on the other side of the glass, and gave a sharp, downward nod. Naomi pressed herself against the cold brick, squeezing her eyes shut. Her heart was beating so violently she thought it might shatter her ribs. "He's in there," she thought, the realization suffocating her. "The monster is in the box." Liam leaned close to her ear. His breath was warm against the freezing shell of her ear. "The floorboard." "Which wall?" "East wall," she whispered, back her voice shaking. "Under the window facing the street." "Not this one." Liam nodded. He pulled a small, heavy steel pry bar from the inside pocket of his jacket. He wedged the flat edge under the rotting wooden frame of the fire escape window. He didn't rush. He applied slow, steady pressure. The wood groaned a low structural ache that was perfectly masked by the distant rumble of an early morning garbage truck blocks away. With a sharp crack that sounded like a gunshot to Naomi's amplified senses, the lock snapped. Liam pushed the window up. It slid open with a soft, gritty hiss. The smell hit Naomi instantly. It wasn't the stale beer or the cheap cologne she was used to. It was the sharp, eye-watering stench of acetone, cut with the heavy metallic odor of gun oil. It was the smell of a man tearing his life apart to run. Liam slipped through the window like smoke. Hayes followed. Naomi climbed over the sill, her rubber-soled shoes landing silently on the cheap-stained carpet of the bedroom. The room was destroyed. Drawers had been ripped from the dresser and thrown onto the unmade bed. The closet doors were wide open, the pile of winter coats scattered across the floor like dead leaves. The olive-green duffel bag was gone. From the living room they heard a sound, a heavy, rhythmic thud. Wood splintering. Greg was at the floorboard. Liam raised his gun. He moved toward the open bedroom doorway. Naomi followed her back, pressed against the wall, her breathing shallow and ragged. She peeked around the doorframe. The living room was lit only by a single cheap floor lamp. Greg was on his knees by the far wall, his back to them. He was wearing dark tactical pants and a black thermal shirt, clothes Naomi had never seen him wear. He had a heavy claw hammer in his hand, ripping the floorboard up with frantic, violent energy. The olive-green duffel bag sat open on the coffee table. Inside, Naomi saw the dull, matte black curves of several automatic weapons, shrink-wrapped bricks of cash, and small airtight plastic bundles containing a fine, pale powder. He wasn't a drywaller. He was a ghost. Greg. Liam's voice cut through the silence of the apartment. It wasn't loud, but it possessed a dense, physical weight. Greg froze. The hammer stopped mid-swing. For a fraction of a second, the apartment was completely still, save for the hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. Greg didn't slowly turn around with his hands up. He didn't try to talk his way out. With a terrifying explosive speed, he twisted his body, his arm, whipping out. He wasn't holding the hammer anymore. He was holding a sleek, suppressed pistol he had pulled from his waistband. He fired. The gun didn't roar. It coughed a sharp, mechanical pft, pft, pft. Wood exploded from the doorframe 3 inches from Naomi's face. Needles of splintered pine bit into her cheek. She screamed, throwing her hands over her head, and collapsed to the floor, curling into a tight ball against the baseboard. The room erupted into chaos. Hayes returned fire with the shotgun. The deafening boom in the confined space of the apartment was physically concussive. It felt like a blow to the chest. The blast shredded the plaster wall behind, where Greg had been kneeling, filling the air with a blinding cloud of white, chalky dust. But Greg wasn't there. He had rolled over the coffee table the instant he fired, moving with a fluid, practiced lethality that made Naomi's blood run cold. He was a predator in his own territory. Another suppressed cough. Hayes let out a wet, heavy grunt. The shotgun clattered to the floor, and Hayes dropped to his knees, his hands clutching his shoulder blade instantly, welling dark and thick between his fingers. Liam was moving. He didn't take cover behind the flimsy drywall. He advanced his weapon, raised, firing 3 rapid shots into the kitchen archway where Greg had disappeared. The sounds of glass shattering and pots crashing to the linoleum echoed through the dust. "Naomi, stay down!" Liam barked his voice, a sharp command, cutting through the ringing in her ears. Naomi was paralyzed. Her mind was a static hiss of terror. She smelled the sharp tang of cordite, the metallic scent of fresh blood, and the suffocating drywall dust. The floorboards vibrated beneath her cheek. Silence fell over the apartment. A heavy, breathless standoff. "You brought the wife, Liam." Greg's voice drifted from the darkness of the kitchen. It didn't sound like the drunken, slurring man who had slapped her across the face 2 days ago. It was calm, cold, Amused. That's sloppy. She's a bleeder. Cries if you look at her too hard. Naomi's breath hitched. The sound of his voice triggered an autonomic response. Her stomach violently cramped her hands, automatically coming up to protect her face. She pointed out the floorboard. Greg Liam called back his voice, steady his eyes, scanning the dust cloud. He was slowly edging toward the kitchen, his boots making no sound on the carpet. She told me you smelled like a chemistry set. She was a much better asset than you realized. A low chuckle came from the kitchen. She's a mop. She cleans up messes. She doesn't make them. Naomi opened her eyes. She was lying on the floor, looking directly at the coffee table. The duffel bag was still there, sitting open. And right beside it, knocked onto the floor during Greg's roll, was a spare magazine for his suppressed pistol. It was a long, extended clip, glinting dully in the lamplight. Naomi looked toward the kitchen. Through the settling dust, she saw a shadow shifting behind the cheap plywood counter. Greg was reloading, or he was out of ammo and looking for that clip. If he found it, he would kill Liam. He would kill Hayes, and then he would drag her back into the dark. The terror that had paralyzed her suddenly shattered, replaced by a surge of pure, white-hot survival instinct. It wasn't bravery. It was absolute, undeniable refusal to go back. Naomi didn't stand up. She scrambled on her hands and knees, moving like a feral animal across the carpet. Her fingers closed around the cold, heavy metal of the extended magazine. Just as her hand grabbed it, Greg lunged out from behind the counter. He saw her, his eyes cold and dead locked onto hers. He didn't look at Liam. He looked at his property, daring to touch his things. He raised his gun, pointing the barrel directly at her chest. "Drop it, you stupid bitch," he hissed. Naomi didn't drop it. She gripped the metal so tightly her knuckles cracked. She stared down the barrel of the gun, and for the first time in 4 years, she didn't flinch. She saw the empty chamber. She saw the slide locked back. He was empty. He was bluffing to get the clip. "No," Naomi whispered. She ripped her arm back and threw the heavy metal magazine as hard as she could. She didn't throw it at him. She threw it behind her, straight through the open doorway of the bedroom, where it hit the far wall and slid under the heavy oak dresser. Greg's face twisted into a mask of absolute, unhinged fury. "I'll kill you." He threw the empty pistol to the floor and charged her, his hands reaching for her throat. He never made it. Liam stepped out from the shadow of the hallway. He didn't say a word. He raised his handgun, aiming perfectly center mass, and pulled the trigger twice. Crack, crack. The gunshots were deafening, a violent rupture of the air. Greg's momentum carried him forward, but his body had already shut down. He crashed onto the carpet inches from Naomi, his heavy boots kicking twice against the floorboards before he went completely still. Blood began to pool rapidly, a dark, creeping stain soaking into the cheap carpet, mixing with the white drywall dust. Naomi sat back on her heels. She stared at the man who had tormented her for 4 years. He just looked like a pile of heavy clothes. The monster was dead. She couldn't breathe. The air was too thick, too heavy with violence. She began to hyperventilate, pulling desperate, ragged gasps of dust-filled air into her lungs. Her hands flew to her chest, her fingers clawing at the fabric of the oversized shirt. A shadow fell over her. Liam knelt in front of her. He didn't try to hug her. He didn't try to comfort her with soft words. He reached out and wrapped his large, bruised hands around her wrists, pulling her hands away from her chest. His grip was tight, grounding an anchor in the storm. "Look at me," he commanded. Naomi's eyes wide and terrified snapped to his. "Breathe, Naomi. In through your nose, out through your mouth." She tried choking on a sob. "He's dead. Oh my God, he's dead. He's gone." Liam said, his voice a low, steady rumble. He is never going to touch you again. Look at him. Liam forced her wrists down, turning her shoulders slightly, so she had to look at Greg's lifeless body. He's meat and bone, Naomi. That's all he ever was. You threw the magazine away. You broke him. Naomi stared at the blood. The smell of it was overwhelming, mixing with the acetone. It was the smell of the end of her old life. She looked back at Liam. He was covered in drywall dust, a smear of grease across his jaw, his dark eyes burning with a primal, intense heat. He wasn't a savior. He was a killer. He was the devil. But as he held her wrists, anchoring her to the ground, Naomi realized she didn't care. The devil had kept her safe. The devil had killed the monster. Hayes groaned from the floor, struggling to sit up. "Boss, we gotta move. Cops are gonna be here in 2 minutes." Liam didn't look away from Naomi. "Can you walk?" Naomi took a deep, shuddering breath. The panic was receding, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. She looked at the blood. She looked at the duffel bag full of cash and drugs. She looked at the man holding her hands. There was no diner to go back to. There was no bus ticket out of this. She had crossed a line, stepped out of the light and into the shadow where men like Liam operated. And God help her, for the first time in her life, she felt safe. "Yes," Naomi said. Her voice didn't shake. "I can walk." Liam released her wrists. He stood up, grabbed the heavy olive-green duffel bag and hauled Hayes to his feet. "Let's go home," Liam said. Naomi stood up in the ruins of her apartment. She didn't look back as she followed him out the door and into the dark.